My father stopped recognizing me 2 years ago. He looks at me now and sees a kind stranger, someone familiar but unnamed, and every single day I walk through that door and introduce myself to the man who taught me how to tie my shoes. My name is Alex, and my father's name is Henry, and this is the hardest and most beautiful story I know. My father was a carpenter, worked with his hands his whole life, built furniture, fixed homes, made things that lasted. We grew up in Augusta, Georgia, 3 kids. My father Henry, my mother Rose, a house that smelled like sawdust and something always cooking. My mother passed 11 years ago. Cancer, she was gone in 8 months. And my father did what quiet men do with grief. He put it somewhere deep and kept working. He was never a man of many words, but he showed love in the specific language of presence. He was always there, at every school event, every hard moment. Every time any of us needed something, he appeared. Without fanfare, without expectation, just there. After my mother passed, my siblings moved on with their lives. My sister Patricia went to Florida. My brother Dennis to Texas. I stayed in Augusta, partly because my work was there, partly because I could not imagine leaving my father alone in that house. We had a routine. I came for dinner on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We watched baseball, argued about nothing important. He cooked the same 4 meals in rotation and never saw anything wrong with that. It was simple, and I loved it completely. Then around 3 years ago, I started noticing small things. He would forget a word mid-sentence. He would ask me the same question twice in one evening. He called me Dennis once. I laughed it off. Then he called me Dennis again 2 weeks later. I took him to the doctor. The diagnosis came back careful and clear. Early-stage dementia. Progressive. I sat in that doctor's office and felt the floor shift under me, not because I didn't know it was possible, but because knowing something is possible and hearing it confirmed are 2 entirely different things. I researched everything, found a care facility 20 minutes from my house, small, warm, run by people who seem to actually care about the people in their charge. Getting my father to agree was the hardest conversation I have ever had. He sat at his kitchen table and listened to me explain it. And then he looked at his hands, the carpenter's hands, scarred and strong and starting to shake slightly now. "I don't want to be a burden to you, Alex," he said. That sentence broke something in me quietly. "You have never been a burden, Dad," I said. "Not once, not for a single day." He moved in on a Thursday in March. I brought his chair, his tools, a wooden box he had made years ago that sat on his dresser. I visited every day. In the beginning, he was fully himself, sharp enough, present enough. We still had our conversations, still argued about baseball. Then the forgetting began to reach further. He started losing names. Faces he had known for decades became unfamiliar. And then one Saturday morning I walked in and he looked at me the way you look at someone you think you might recognize but cannot quite place. "Good morning," he said, politely, like I was a visitor. I stood very still. "Good morning," I said. "I'm Alex. I'm your son." He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Then he smiled. "Alex," he said, like the name meant something, even if the face had become uncertain. "Sit down," he said. "Do you want coffee?" I sat down. And I stayed for 2 hours. And I drove home and sat in my driveway and cried in a way I had not cried since my mother passed. After that, the visits became a ritual of reintroduction. Every morning, I would walk in, sit beside him, and say, "Good morning, Dad. I'm Alex. I'm your son." Sometimes something would register, a warmth, a recognition that wasn't quite the word, but was something underneath the word. Sometimes he would just nod and smile, politely, warmly. like I was someone he was glad to see even if he couldn't say why. Some days were harder than others, days when he seemed frightened, when the unfamiliarity of his own surroundings pressed in on him. I would sit beside him and talk, not about anything important, just talk, about the weather, about baseball, about a chair he had built years ago that was still in my living room. His hands would settle, his breathing would slow, and I understood that even when the name was gone, something else was still there. Something older than memory. Then, one Tuesday, I had a work emergency. Meetings that ran into each other. Calls that couldn't wait. I told myself I would go in the evening. Then evening came and I was exhausted, and I told myself he wouldn't notice, that it was just one day. I went to bed that night with a weight I couldn't explain. At 7 the next morning, my phone rang. It was the care home, one of the nurses. Her voice careful. "Mr. Alex, your father had a difficult night. He didn't eat dinner. He kept telling us he was waiting for someone." I was already sitting up. "He kept saying the same thing all evening," she said. "He said he was waiting for his son." I was in my car in 4 minutes. I walked into his room and he was sitting in his chair by the window, hands folded, looking at the door. When I came in, his whole body changed, settled, softened. He didn't say my name. He didn't reach for me. He just looked at me and said, "There you are." 3 words, like he had been holding them all night. I sat beside him, took his hand. He held it the way fathers hold the hands of small children, firmly, like he was keeping me from getting lost. And we sat there in the morning light without saying anything more. I have thought about that morning many times since. My father does not know my name most days now. He does not know the details of our shared life. He does not remember the Saturdays, or the baseball, or the sawdust smell of his workshop. But somewhere deeper than all of that, somewhere that dementia has not reached, and I do not believe it ever will, he knows he loves me, and he knows when I am not there. Memory lives in the mind, but love lives somewhere older, somewhere that does not forget, even when everything else does. If this story reached you, comment "There you are" below. And if your father is still here, go sit beside him today, because presence is the one thing that never needs a name.